My name is Dan Schneckenberger. I'm the Business Services Director for CareerSource Tampa Bay, and we have collaborated with the Recruiters Networking Group on a series of reemployment and employability skills seminars, and this is the second of the first four that we're going to do. This one is Virtual Interviewing and Communication 101. And we have two great speakers that are going to give you some good advice how to navigate this new world of virtual meetings and potential interviews moving forward. Amy, if I could ask you to mute everyone, that would be great, except me, until I'm done, and our hosts. But I'll kick right into our introductions. We have Brian Mulligan with us. Brian began his career in human resources and retail, after which he worked in an agency, both a recruiter and later an account manager. He's excited to continue to work with IT talent in Penske as a corporate IT recruiter with a focus on the Tampa market. We're also lucky to have Hillary Rich with us of PSCU. And she is a global talent acquisition partner with over 18 years experience, workplace, domestic, and international organizations, providing executive support in IT, pharma, healthcare, banking, and digital marketing. And Hillary, as I said, is currently working at PSCU on the talent acquisition team. I would ask all of you on the meeting to use the chat feature at the bottom of the screen if you have immediate questions, both for CareerSource or the speakers. And at the completion of their presentation, we will open it up for additional questions if any of the attendees have some. So with that, thank you, Brian and Hillary, and you guys can take it away.
Thank you.
So Dan, thank you so much for starting us out with those introductions. And I'm sure Hillary and I will talk more about ourselves throughout the presentation, some of our own lived experiences. Obviously today we're going to talk to you about virtual interviewing and virtual communication. This is a topic that now more than ever is extremely relevant. And, you know, for better or for worse, moving into the future, it's going to continue to be so. And I mean, I personally think that's with or without the current pandemic situation. You know, obviously we are already a very virtual world. We are already a very technologically advanced world. And I don't think that that's going to change. So we're going to be going through some tips that that we've found successful, that we've given candidates and seen be successful, both before the current situation and during. And then at the end, we're going to give everyone a chance to ask any questions. Like Dan said, if you use the chat function, if you are able to ask questions during and we can catch it, then we will absolutely address it as we are talking. But if we do end up missing it, we'll have time at the end to address everything. Hillary, do you have anything to add there?
No, that was perfect. Yep.
Awesome.
So actually, I'll go ahead and just get started. As Brian said, we'll introduce ourselves a little bit further through our conversations, but I just wanted to let everyone know I've been in the Tampa Bay area in recruiting, talent acquisition management for over 18 years, and definitely a lot of different industries, which is lucky to have a broad spectrum. And so would love to also extend after this, and Brian and I will talk about this too, for LinkedIn connections after this for any further information that we can give anyone, or just to connect and have another person in your network. Okay, so I'm going to actually start off with talking about what happens when you are invited to a virtual interview, which pretty much is now going across the board. The first thing that I feel is most important is to test and download all of the tools that are given to you. So whether it's a WebEx technology or if it's Skype, there's so many different tools out there. So make sure that it's already downloaded on your computer so then you can actually test it. Ensure that all of the necessary links, so whether it's your speaker, your headphones, whatever you want to use to do that, make sure everything is working accordingly. So when it comes to your sound and camera, so even today I had to test my lighting, I had to test my sound. I called a friend to see if it was working okay. You just want to really make sure that it not only aesthetically looks okay, but that it sounds okay too, and that you have a good solid connection. And that was actually the last bullet, is really making sure your connection is sound. There's a lot of times too that you'll be in a certain area in your house and your connection is not as good as others. So definitely to make sure that you are in a good area in your home to have a good quality and to test all of that before this all happens.
Absolutely. And to piggyback off of that, I mean, Hillary talked about calling a friend. I think that that is so important. There are other things that you might be able to do if no one's available, of course, to kind of pull the curtain back on this. Hillary and Dan and some of his colleagues and I all joined this call 30 minutes before. We were able to test our technology then. I was given the ability to share my screen. It didn't work right away, and we were able to figure it out because we had the time. So I would encourage everybody to make sure that you have the time to do that. You don't want to be in that time crunch. And I think it can be likened really easily to showing up for an interview early. If it's an area of the town you've never been in, maybe Google Maps says it's going to take 30 minutes to get there, but you're going to leave an hour early because earlier is better. You can always just be waiting there, or if the room isn't open, depending on the technology you're using, there may be a waiting room. You can at least know that you're all set. A lot of times it'll come up with a preview. You can test your lighting that way. You can test your audio. So, I think one of the most important things is just making sure you have the time to do all that.
Right. And also to add to that too, just how we were saying beforehand to get in here, you can actually log into usually about 15 minutes early. Sometimes there is a certain time frame to be able to log in before the even host logs in. So you can test on the actual technology you'll be using to make sure the technology that you're using for the interview is also working.
Absolutely. Oh, there we are. Just make sure. Okay, perfect. So of course, some of these were already addressed in the last slide, but you want to make sure that you're in the right environment to have your virtual call, and especially if it's an interview, you want to make sure that they can see you properly, that nothing in your background is going to be distracting. Cats jumping around. A dirty room even, no one is necessarily judging your home and how you live, but that can be distracting. And so you want to make sure that if possible, it is, as clear of a background as possible. I would also suggest using a darker space in the background. It sometimes helps the camera catch your features better. And then something with Zoom is specifically, but I know that all of the different platforms have the options for virtual backgrounds. We would really suggest skipping that, right? Those are very fun, and they can even be very useful depending on what you need. I was on a virtual career fair the other day, and I was able to put a Penske shop behind me so people could see what that looked like. And that worked out well, and I had the time to test it, but that was a little bit of a different situation than if you were interviewing. So we would suggest just avoid using any of those virtual backgrounds because they're not reliable and it can be distracting. Limit your own distractions. Obviously, you would never have your phone out during an interview. As a recruiter, and I'm sure Hillary, you could agree, it would be extremely off-putting for a candidate to be on their phone on a virtual screen as well, or even doing things on their computer that aren't part of the interview. So if you can mute other chat functions, or if you can quit out applications so that you're not getting push notifications, we really suggest doing that. Of course, there are going to be things that you can't control. This is a new time. And I think that everybody is given a little bit of leeway for sure, but let's use the example of children, for instance. A lot of daycares are closed. A lot of people are both working, interviewing, and watching their kids at the same time. So what we suggest for this situation is to just be upfront about it at the beginning. Not as serious as children, obviously, but even with pets, right? So, for instance, if it was me on this interview today, I would tell you, thank you so much for having me today. I do want to let you know, I've taken steps to remove all my cats from the room. I do have 2 cats, and I actually put the vacuum cleaner right in front of the door so that they wouldn't really want to approach it. However, I can't really promise that they're not going to scratch. So if you do hear a slight scratching noise, just know that that's what it is, and I'll do my best to keep that from impacting the interview. So just giving that little disclaimer at the beginning, and that was a personal example because I don't have children, but obviously if you do, you can say, I've taken X, Y, and Z steps in order to make sure that we aren't interrupted, but just in case, I want to let you know that this is a possibility. And then we already talked about testing the new space with a friend or family member. Sorry, someone wasn't on mute.
On remote. Oh, I know I'm mute.
No problem. But we already talked about testing the space with a friend or family member, especially if it's a room you don't use a lot, or anything like that. You want to make sure that your internet works fine. And something I thought about that we didn't even put on this, I would plug in your computer. It's something small, but you never know how much battery these things are going to take, and you don't want to have to get up and do that in the middle of things. So if you can make sure that your computer is plugged in, it should make things go just a little bit more smooth.
Yeah, and to add to that too, one of the things I was thinking about is the worst thing is to have your camera basically underneath you, making sure that if you even put something underneath, I actually have a board game underneath my laptop right now. So anything, any tools, anything from your home that you can use to help out, you just don't want to see the person's underneath their nose. You want to have it even up higher, if anything, because that's aesthetically, that even looks better. But making sure that it's not where it's, you see up someone's chin or nose. So wanted to add that as well. Absolutely.
That's a great point.
Now, I just got a chat that someone said there's a sound issue. Is everyone able to hear me okay? Yeah, I guess we're good. Okay, perfect. Thank you guys. Okay, I appreciate that. So the next slide we're going to talk about is dress. So I told Brian last night when we were talking, I was going to do a funny and put like a Hawaiian shirt on and have my hair all disheveled just to show the not to do. Figured this would not be the right place for that, but it is really important. The first thing, obviously, it's virtual. So the presentation is really a very important piece to this. You want to make a good presentation. You want to make sure that you're wearing professional clothing. I have, a blazer, and gentlemen can wear, like Brian's wearing a button-down shirt, something just to look professional, and making sure too that even the bottom half is necessary, because you never know, there could be an issue that happens and you need to get up, and you don't want to have something underneath your bottom, on your bottom, that's not appropriate. So making sure that fully dressed to be like you are going to an interview. It makes you feel better. It makes you feel a bit more confident. So definitely suggest that. As Brian said about even the environment being a little bit darker, wearing darker clothing just because, again, you don't want to wash yourself out. You want to make sure people can see you clearly. Wearing darker clothes does give you a little bit better of a picture on your camera. And again, treating it, like I just said, treating it like a professional interview, as if you were going into an office. So making sure that your appearance, so your hair is at least combed, and you don't have to wear makeup, and you don't have to quote unquote trim your beard or anything like that, but just make sure you do look professional and that you do put on a good face for that.
Absolutely. And I think that point about when you look good, you feel good, and you're more confident is so important. I don't mind telling everybody that I don't, on a typical day, if I'm in quarantine, I don't generally get up and worry about, rushing into the shower and getting dressed. But today I did, because I knew I was going to be talking to people, and I do feel much better, right? And I put a little product in my hair, which is not normal for me, really, even outside. But of course, without haircut options, we're getting a little bit longer than we're used to. But just things like that, right? I mean, I did trim my beard up a little bit, and Hillary, I know you said you don't have to. Certainly, you don't have to, but if you're able to, I think that you definitely should. Anything you would do during a normal interview, I would suggest doing now. Absolutely, those are great points. Awesome. Okay, so communication. So this is an interesting one, right? Because obviously we are over the internet. We are not face to face, and it's hard to read nonverbals when this is the case. However, I would encourage everyone to really be aware of their body language in multiple ways. So certainly the way that you're sitting. You may have noticed I'm straightening up as I say this because I have a problem with slouching personally. It's something I'm working on. But just make sure that you're attentive as you would be in front of somebody. To be like this probably isn't the best case scenario, right? Like this, not great, right? We want to make sure that we're still professional. And again, sitting up straight is a confidence builder, and it shows that you know what you're talking about. I would also say that, you may have seen I'm using my hands. I'm someone who's gesticulates a lot. And that's something that I'm continuing to do now because I feel like it helps me get my point across, and I feel like it is a nonverbal that helps my communication. And I think that that's okay within moderation, right? So, certainly I'm open to the feedback if it's too much, but I think that you don't have to necessarily limit yourself so much to just be, straight up in your chair. Try to talk to the camera as you would a person. Take a deep breath before the interview starts to begin with. So hopefully you're logged on early and you're able to compose yourself. 10 count in, 10 count out can do wonders for settling your mind and preparing yourself for the interview. It may be awkward, right? And that's just, it's okay. It's going to be okay. If you don't hear somebody because their camera's breaking up, if something happens and that wasn't expected, a kid, a pet, anything runs in, it's okay. Just compose yourself again and get back to the interview, right? There's going to be a lot of leeway that's going to need to be given. And we're all going to have to deal with that as it happens. So I would just encourage you not to let it, break your stride. I would encourage you to try to continue to remain calm and take it as it comes. A few seconds of silence is absolutely okay. And I think that this is a good tip even for interviewing outside of a virtual setting. A lot of people feel like they have to know an answer right away, and that's just not how interviews go. That's not how questions work, right? Personally, when I'm giving an interview, if I ask a question, I would so much rather the person take even 10 seconds of silence, which is a lot, right? That's a long time to not talk. If the answer is going to be concise and answer the question I'm asking, and if it shows that they're putting thought into it. Think about what you want to say, and if you don't understand the question or there are multiple ways that the answer could go, you can always ask clarifying questions. Interviews are conversations. They're not meant to be interrogations. So, be an active part of that. Ask clarifying questions. Make sure to be concise with your answers. Always know that the interviewer will ask more questions if they need it. Don't feel like you have to. It's something I struggle with a lot. I always felt like I had to address every single question that they might have before they would even ask it. And it ended up jumbling my answers. So make sure you are answering the question they ask and then challenge yourself to stop there and wait until they ask a clarifying question of their own. And then, of course, make sure you're speaking at a clear volume. I'm more of an extroverted person, so speaking loudly usually isn't a problem for me. Sometimes it's even too loud. If you're not that way and you're more of a quiet tone, challenge yourself to speak up a little bit. You can even ask them at the beginning of the interview, is my tone okay? Or is my volume okay? Can you hear me all right? Is everything good? And let them tell you yes or no to be able to adjust.
Yeah, that's perfect. And just, to add to that too, you're looking at someone as if you were sitting next, in front of them. So like Brian said, taking that pause, even though you're on the camera, it's still as if you were in person. It's okay to take a pause and just be like, or you can even say, what, that's a great question. I just need a minute for that. And, maybe have something around for you to start writing as they're also talking to you too. And that's okay. You can actually, you have to have a skill a little bit to actually, start writing and not looking down. It takes a little bit, but it's good practice to start doing that too, just in general, when you're taking notes, when you're talking to someone, it's a really good idea to be able, to add that as well. But,
absolutely. And that actually brings us great. So Hillary, I know this is your slide, but talking about having a notepad, perfect segue.
Yep. And as you can probably hear, I have my dogs barking in the background because they hear other voices. So this is what happens. I locked them in a room, but they want out. So anyways, so what I was mentioning to you is printing a copy, obviously what we have prepared here, is printing a copy of your resume for reference. So I have my notes here. It's just a really good idea to have that in front of you, not as much maybe on the computer, just because you want to be able to not have to be clicking back and forth when they're asking you, but have it printed out and you can, look, you can, know your resume, but also you can look really quickly at, at your notes. So that having that there, having it digitally copy though. So if a person that you're interviewing with does not have a copy, you can immediately send it to them. So do have it up there, in your laptop when you're ready to talk to someone, so that you can immediately send it to them in the beginning of the interview to say, oh, if you don't have a copy, I have one right here, I can send you immediately. Also preparing questions. So, we can go over questions too with people if they need help with coming up with questions to ask. There's also Google. You can Google some really good questions to ask, interviewers. And there's also the don'ts, right? So there's things that you want to ask and there's things that you shouldn't ask. And those are things that we can also go over, depending on time. I didn't want to really go over too many. But one of the things is definitely about, the culture and especially with now, how the company is doing with this pandemic. Is okay to ask. You can say, how's everyone feeling? Are they doing a lot to engage in the employees? And that is okay to ask. It's what you're wanting to hear more about the organization that you might be working for. And then the next bullet is try to be in a quiet area. So obviously there's things that happen. There are kids that run around, or there's dogs that are barking. It's okay. You want to try to make it where it is a quiet space, but there's things that happen, and it's okay. And we're going to say this at the end, but we're all in this together. We realize there are obstacles that we're facing right now, whether it's home, work. So know that it's okay if it happens, and we'll move on, right? So you just have to keep it going and try for it to not get to you, right? Because that's the worst thing. If you get stumbled because of those issues in the background, just let it go. And then be authentic. So I think, Brian and I are probably one of the better ones to do this, because I think we are true believers of helping out our community and wanting to wanting to help. So I hope that's coming across. So that's what we want you to come across too in your interview. Just be yourself, and that's what's going to sell someone. Your resume has all of the details. Your background, you've lived it. So just be natural and have fun with it as well. So.
Absolutely. And Andy just said in the chat, it's important to be real. I couldn't agree more. They want to know who you are, and that's what the interview is for. So show them that, right? You don't have to be anybody else than who you would naturally be. Hillary talked about, maybe wanted to put on a Hawaiian shirt. That's something fun that she thinks about, and then it kind of shows her sense of humor. I think that was perfect. If she was in an interview, I would encourage her to bring up that story also, right? I think that's great. We are doing pretty good on time, Hillary, so I think it would be great if we could talk about some questions.
Okay, great. Good.
So I do have a few that I always suggest people. It's hard to know without knowing the job, right? Because you do want at least, I would say 2 or 3 that are specific to the job. It shows that you are qualified and the field, that you're already thinking. I think a really good thought experiment is, imagine it's your first day on the job and you know everything you know right now, and you have to go in and do the job. What would you need to know to get started? And go from there, right? Not every question you come up will be gold, but write them all down, and then you can pick the 4 to 5 that are going to be best. Ones that I always include, who will be my direct supervisor, because from the outside, an organization structure is not always clear. And I think that's extremely important to know. And it's not always going to be someone in the room with you. So you would want to make sure you know who you'd be reporting to. What is my training going to look like? What will my first project be if I get the job? And the way that you are wording these is also telling the interviewers that you're already thinking about yourself in the job. And I think that that's so important. So be confident with the way you ask them as well. if I get the job, what will my first project be? Shows them that you're already considering, that you might have this. Hillary, do you have any other major ones that you usually suggest?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things I always also, even in my case, like to ask, because unfortunately, there has been where I've been in an unemployment situation. I want to know what the challenges might be, what challenges they've had in that position to make sure that I'm able to be able to cover those challenges that they're facing. So what challenges they have in that position. Also, ask a little bit about the team dynamic. So, the size of the team is really good to ask if you don't already know. A lot of this is done in the preliminary stages. But again, it's nice to kind of get some consistency. So asking the same questions too, by the way, to different groups is okay as well. So don't think you have to come up with different questions for different groups. It is okay to hear that consistency and ask the same question. I also like to ask too, for at the end, of an interview, there's some people that say, is there anything that you don't, hear on my or see on my resume that you hope that I would have had? I don't know if that's the right way to say it. I think that you want to make sure it's more of a match. So, knowing that you want this position, you might want to say, I would love this opportunity. Can you let me know if there's anything else you need to ask me or anything else you want to know that maybe we didn't cover? So kind of like giving it a little bit more to make sure that, they know that you're really interested in this position. And if there's anything else that they can, that you can provide to them.
Absolutely, and this kind of goes along with that. Vicky Stoller said something in the chat that I'm going to read everyone because I think it's great. So she says, in my industry, I have a brag book. I send selected documents to myself before the interview to reinforce what I covered on my resume. Once I ask if they, or once in the interview, I ask if they want to see anything, and I send it during the interview. So I think that that's great, having extra materials. And I would suggest that this even be beyond letters of recommendation or certifications. Those are all really great things, don't get me wrong, but usually those are to get you in the door. What I think Vicky's talking about, what I think is so great, is if you have additional materials. For instance, as a recruiter, I might send myself my qualification document of when I first get a requisition, what I do to make sure that I know exactly what they're looking for, because that's going to show the manager of recruitment how I approach that. And that's a very real example, right? That happens every single day as a recruiter. And there are different ways to do it and different styles for it. And so I want them to know what my style is, and then they can even give critiques on it. It becomes more of a conversation. So I think that's great, Vicky. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, and one more to add is maybe asking to what type of person has been successful on the team or in the role, and maybe have them describe to you what the type of person that they're actually looking for in a very offset way.
Absolutely. And I think it's fine to even ask, is this a new position? Am I replacing somebody? And why did the last person leave? It's pretty straightforward, but as long as it's worded in a respectful way, I think you as an applicant have the right to know. Absolutely. And hopefully they're prepared to answer that, because as an employer, that's their job to be prepared for an interview too. Really quick, right before we move on from the be prepared slide, I do also want to say, just because I took a drink, and I say this to every applicant, even in person, have a glass of water with you, right? Or a bottle of water if you're in person. You're talking a lot during an interview by nature. Your mouth is going to get dry. So have something there, and so you don't have to think about it. You can just take a quick sip. I do suggest water, coffee, tea, I think is also fine. Today I have a cold brew next to me. I would stay away from cans of soda, anything that might tint your lips or dye your tongue. And I think anything, fruity, I guess is what I would say, but you don't need any straws or umbrellas, certainly nothing that could be construed as alcoholic, right? So keep it simple, but have a drink there for you. I think it's important.
Nothing that will dry you out, because I think you mentioned Coke products or soda. Soda dries your mouth out, so definitely water or something that makes you stay hydrated.
Absolutely. Awesome. Perfect. So then after the interview, and we kind of touched on this when we were talking about the questions, but you should always be asking about next steps, and make that your last question. And Hillary, in an example, said, and she may have not even realized she was saying it, but tell them you want the job if you still do, right? And it's possible you don't. Interviews are to find out more about it. I would say, make sure to be authentic at this point of the process. If you don't want the job, don't tell them. But if you are confirmed that, I think I would be great at this, and I think I could really succeed, tell them. And you can say those exact things, and you could say, what are my next steps here? What can I expect? And then just end it there and let them answer. And if you need qualifying questions, you can ask. Certainly, you don't want to put too much pressure on them, but this could also be a good chance to let them know about other opportunities that you have in the pipeline. I would say to share opportunities that you are waiting on an offer for. Unless they ask, sometimes they will say, do you have any interviews scheduled? And if you're comfortable sharing, I don't think it hurts at all. But if you're waiting on an offer for another company and you're also very interested in the company you're talking to, share that, be honest with what you're saying. Don't make it a situation where you could be caught in saying something that isn't necessarily true. But, you can share with them what you have going on, because if they want you, it could speed it up. I've seen it happen time and time again from the inside as a recruiter. Trust me, if an applicant is great and they tell us that they might be off the market soon, it lights a fire. It really does. We would want to make sure that you are completely logged off before ending the interview. Leave the meeting, quit the application, and close the computer before you kind of drop your guard and become, maybe your more at home self, or you get up and start doing things. You don't want to be caught on camera. We've seen them online, right? The popular videos of people not knowing that they're still on camera. You just never want that to be you. And in a virtual setting, it's more important than ever to make sure. And then, of course, follow up with a thank you note. This is something that people might say is more of an older practice, but even as someone who is, maybe 5 to 10 years into my career, I still suggest that people do this. I always do it. In a world before a pandemic, I suggested doing a handwritten note and to send it directly after the interview. It'll get there a day later, and it helps it stick in your mind more. With the pandemic, I suggest an email. I really do. I think that you can't trust anymore that it's going to get there. You can't trust that they're going to want to touch it, right? Obviously, we have to be cognizant of things like that now, but an email will do just as good. If you need their email, so you might be able to get it from an invite that was sent to you, whether that be by a recruiter, or you can look to see if the interviewers are also on the invite. Depending on the platform, it may show, these are the different attendees, and here's their contact information they logged in with. So you can try to get it there as well. But if you're unsure of how to do that, or you just want to make sure you have the right one, it is okay to ask them for their email before you log off. You can let them know that you'd love to send them a little bit more information about you. Hillary, do you have any more suggestions of how to frame that question?
Yeah, absolutely. You can even just say, I'd love to follow up with you with a note. So you don't have to say it's going to be a thank you note. You can just say, I want to follow up with you with a follow-up note. And that way too, you can actually add any, as mentioned previously, you can add any projects that you've had that you have, noted, recommendation letters, anything like that. You can add that. It's just another touch, to that. One thing I did want to add, and you have to be careful about too, when you talk to people about, the job and wanting the job, make sure too that there's different levels of interviews, right? So you have the interview with the recruiter, and then you have the interviews with the hiring manager or the team. In the recruiter interview, ask those questions about, about maybe salary, or ask about time off, or ask about all those questions. Do not ask the hiring manager or the team those questions. So making sure too that you know your audience. So, when we talk about those questions that we just did in the previous slide, I just wanted to make sure that people realize that we're talking to a little bit about both, right? We're talking about having conversations with the talent acquisition team or recruiter, and then we're also talking about the hiring manager and what's appropriate to ask the hiring manager not to ask. So making sure that that's aligned. I just wanted to add that because there are times that there's things that should be covered in the preliminary stages of the interview process that the manager, if it's not covered and then it's covered in that interview, it doesn't look good for both parties, right? So just wanted to note that as well.
I think that that's a great point. And of course, you can never prepare for every single instance, right? If they if they have one phone call with you or one Zoom call with you and they want to make you an offer after that, that's great. But you don't have to accept the offer right away if you still have questions. So certainly, take Hillary's advice, and then you can always ask it later if necessary. If you've never asked about PTO and they've never brought it up during the interview process and you get an offer, well, just tell them, thank you so much. I just have a few more questions before I'd be comfortable letting you know my answer, and you can go from there. So I think that's a great point, Hillary. Awesome. So that brings us to the end. So, Hillary mentioned at the beginning, it is important to remember, we are all in this together. As talent acquisition professionals, Hillary and I are here to help you. Please, feel free to find us on LinkedIn. I will say that mine says that I'm in Reading, Pennsylvania. That's where my headquarters is. So just know that that is me working for Penske. But any questions you have with or without our companies, even if it's not with the people or the companies we work for, we're happy to help you. If it's a one-off thing after this, if you're not comfortable speaking up in this instance, here's our emails as well. And I encourage you to screenshot this or write them down and follow up with anything that you would need. We love helping people. We really do. It's just something that we're passionate about. We've chosen to spend our lives helping people find the careers that they're going to flourish in. And it doesn't necessarily have to just be people who we know to make that happen. So whether or not we've spoken before, please feel free to reach out. Hillary, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, so as Brian mentioned too, try to find us on LinkedIn with, do our names, connect with us, and we might not be able to connect right away with you, but it will happen. Also too, wanted to add, this is a time, I think I saw a quick chat question about feedback. So there's a lot of companies that are still hiring, and there's a lot of companies that are hiring a lot of people. The biggest thing for me, I'm putting back my recruiter hat on because I've been talent acquisition manager for quite some time, and kind of lost a little touch with the fact that there's so many positions that one recruiter is filling. So for instance, I have 30 positions that I'm filling right now. It's a lot of positions to fill. It's a lot of people to talk to. If you do get an email to say, unfortunately, you didn't get this job, don't be shy. Go ahead and follow up that person. Say, hey, are there any, is there any feedback you can provide to me so I can, learn from this situation and move on and grow myself, in the interview process too. So it could have been something in the interview that was done or said, or it could have just been the background, but let the person know that you're looking for feedback. It might not be right away, but I know that it's important to people. And I know for me, I definitely try to give feedback as much as I can. Sometimes just time-wise, the bandwidth that we have right now is slim. But that's something I know a lot of recruiters really try to do. If you don't get it, it's okay to ask. That's what, that's really what it boils down to.
Absolutely. That's awesome. So we want to make sure.
Brian, I got a question, and hey, Tammy, if you want to unmute everyone, and so they can actually ask our wonderful speakers a question on this virtual platform, but I'll ask this question and start it. We were having a discussion before we kicked off the meeting on other platforms. We were talking about Zoom and Microsoft Teams, but we know that other employers are looking at other technologies to conduct interviews and potentially a virtual job fair. Can you offer some advice on maybe some other technologies that some of the applicants may run into with a various company, or maybe even walk us through a little bit what you anticipate on a virtual job fair and how that may work out for someone looking for a job on that type of platform?
Absolutely. So the platforms that I've used the most over this time specifically has been Zoom and Microsoft Teams. Now, Microsoft Teams is something that I chose to use because my company has access to it. But I've liked it a lot because you can have a specialized link that you send out that's for that room only. And even folks who don't have Microsoft Teams are able to click on it and use the application off of the internet in order to access the room. So, I would keep an eye out for those. I know that Google has a chat function as well, Google Rooms. And from my understanding, this is being used a lot for schools because there's a lot of whiteboard options, and it's free because it's Google. I've actually not used that myself, so I can't really give any opinion or advice one way or another on the Google platform, but just know that it's out there. What I will say is that if you get a platform that you're not familiar with, there's a bunch of Blue Jeans is another one I've seen. Hillary, I'm sure you could give some even more.
Reason was the other one that I had. Yep.
Absolutely. If you get a platform that you're not familiar with, it's okay to ask questions. I would suggest doing your research if you can. Google is your friend here. And most of these, if it's not proprietary, it's the information is going to be out there. If it is proprietary, they should be giving you step-by-step instructions. So, if it's something even that you've never heard of, Google it because it's probably out there. It's probably just a less used option. And that platform will have directions on their website of how to use it and how to be successful with it, and the different functionalities. And then this brings us back to the test your technology slide. Make sure that's done in advance. If you are unsure about it, Google it days in advance so that you have time to ask questions and get answers if necessary. Maybe don't wait just until the last 30 minutes or the 30 minutes before to log on. Hillary, do you have anything to add there?
I think you covered it. I mean, there's so many different virtual options companies are going to go with. You just need to do your homework a little bit and Google it. Even ask your friends, maybe put something on Facebook to say, hey, has anyone else used this? Just to get some feedback. So, it's across the country. We're, obviously we're in Florida, but this is happening everywhere. So definitely, reach out to your network.
Absolutely. And what Dan was saying about a conversation we were having before, the innovation for these platforms is going to continue. There are going to be platforms in 3 weeks from now that we've never heard of before that everyone's using. So it's hard to stay up with all of it. Just do your research and don't get too frustrated with it if you're not someone who's maybe technologically savvy, because that's okay. There are a few questions in the chat that I want to make sure to address. So the first one is from Charlene. So she says, when is the best time to discuss salary? If the recruiter asks your salary expectations, should you give them a direct answer or should that be discussed later on in the process? Hillary, do you want to kick this one off and then I'll jump in with my thoughts?
Yeah, sure. So typically in the process, there's an application that's filled out first, even before you talk to someone at the company. So making sure that that information is put in there, and salary is interesting. We can't ask as recruiters, we can't ask you directly what you're making, but what we can do is say, this is the range the company has. Is this fitting your expectations? So in the beginning, to recruiters, they can talk to you about salary. So if you want to ask directly, this is my salary expectation, and be very honest, because at the end of the day, if this is going to be a position that you're filling, you want to make sure that it's covered right in the beginning. I've done this recently where it was an executive level position, and they didn't have anything on the application. So I said, let's talk about salary in the beginning so we make sure that it is a good fit and not waste anyone's time. So, I said, what is your salary expectation? Or I'm sorry, I didn't say that. I said, this is our salary expectation, our range. Does this fit with what your expectation is? We used to be able to ask that. We used to be saying, what is your desired salary? But now we can't. There's some limitations with that.
Yeah, but they're newer laws too. I know PA recently in Florida too passed some stuff in the last year or two that limits what we're allowed to ask. So best time to discuss salary, in my opinion, is early as possible. I think that money, obviously we're not working for free here. Money is extremely important to us. Even if it doesn't run our lives, it pays our bills and allows us to do the things we need to do, supports our families, right? And so if there's a number that you have I would feel comfortable bringing that up as early as possible. I would tell you that a recruiter, most likely, I've never heard of a situation where the recruiter controls the salary expectation or the salary that the company is able to give. Frankly, I'm not even a part of that conversation. I'm more of a mouthpiece for my candidates. So I can go back to the hiring managers and the VPs and say, you know, Brian wants to make this much. Can we do that? And then they'll take that into consideration. I will also say that a company doesn't always have an exact number that they're able to give at the beginning. Know your industry, right? Know what you're worth in the market, and make sure that the company is willing to pay that. If there's a specific number that you need in order to be interested, don't waste anyone's time and bring that up as early as possible. But you know, this happened really recently, actually, with my company. We were interviewing somebody. It's an IT. IT is a very complicated hiring process, considering everything that they bring in and the team that we already have. And the candidate was able to give us their expectation. It was a little bit higher than what we normally were willing to pay. However, their application warranted further conversation. And then we were able to come to a number that everyone could agree on, and they ended up coming on and being onboarded, right? So I think it just has to be a conversation. Know that no one is trying to get one over on you. Companies, it's in their best interest to pay you what you're worth because it's a retention issue. So don't, you know, be afraid to say what you're worth. And if you say a number and they say, I'm sorry, we can't pay that, that's what it is. And then, you know, maybe you need to do some research on if your number is over market value. I would make sure that the lowest of your range is something that you would actually accept. And then I usually tell people to go anywhere up to 10K more than that. And then that's just a overarching advice. Haley, do you have anything more to add?
Yeah, no, I think you covered it. You know, just to be honest with yourself and what you feel like you're worth, and know the market, do your research. It's really important, though, as Brian said, to really talk about it in the beginning. Companies have budgets. You know, when an open position comes about, it just doesn't appear. There's so much back office work that happens when we open up a requisition. So typically it's a budget that's talked about. It's, you know, the succession planning. It's a lot of different things that are discussed before a position is actually posted on the internet. So we do a lot of back office information. Putting stuff on application is very important, though, and I will say, because of where we are today and the amount of jobs that are out there, especially for PSCU, applications speak a lot. And if you don't have enough on the application, sometimes you don't get looked at. So I would say try to fill out the application to, you know, as much as information as you can provide, because that will help you when there's a search being, you know, when recruiters do searches on their database. When they look at your information, they'll do a quick screen. I'm giving you honest answers, right? So making sure you put enough information on the application is very important.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So Joshua asks, would you recommend a natural background setting or a virtual background when interviewing? I hear conflicting opinions since the start of COVID-19. And Joshua, we were able to address that earlier. Hillary and I personally suggest a natural background. The virtual backgrounds are very inconsistent. A lot of times it's distracting because they're fuzzy or something's going on with the colors that it's not catching. So natural background, solid color walls if possible, because it'll help with the lighting and the camera. And then nothing distracting behind you either. No offensive posters, nothing like that, right? I did debate, my wife drew a picture of me that I think is creepy. I did debate taking it down. I decided to keep it up because it's not offensive, right? So it is your home. You don't have to change things, right? But I would just make sure that there's nothing that's gonna be overtly offensive behind you. Hillary, do you have anything there?
No, that you nailed it.
Dola Meyer asks, there's a website, Virtual Vocations, but it charges. Seems high. Would rather not spend money now. Job notices appear like remote worker in a certain city industry named. in general. I searched for the site without having to pay, which seems high and has some bad reviews. Would you recommend finding an open position that only seems to be listed on one particular site, which requires payment? On that listing, I have the experience in those industries and I know the topic, but cannot find via web searches the job listing anywhere else but the paid site. That's a very interesting question. So, Hilly, I'm going to send this over to you because personally, I've never heard of a paywall behind an application. That sounds like a scam to me.
I was just going to say that I have not heard that in my almost 20 years in this market. I have not heard that. So Brian said it. I think it might be a scam. Be careful. There's so many other tools out there that you can use. There's LinkedIn, there's Indeed, Career Builder, Ladders. I mean, there's so many websites that are free. Career Source, local, company. Hey, Dan. I mean, there's so many free resources out there. If you have any questions, if you want to follow up with us after this, please feel free to do so. That I would hate for you to fall into an issue with that.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, I'm reading more and more about new scams that are popping up when people are more vulnerable than ever right now. If you have any questions about something that doesn't seem right, please feel free to ask. If it doesn't seem right, it probably isn't. And at RNG, actually not too long ago, Hilary, I'm not sure if you saw this, but someone reached out because they had a weird interview with somebody that was supposed to be Skype, but the video, the person on the other end wasn't on video. Yep. She had never heard of the company before. It was completely remote, seemed too good to be true. And then ended up, it was too good to be true. They were trying to get her social from her. And she ended up not sending it, thank God, but things like that are happening all the time. So, do your research, make sure, common phishing things are changing one letter or putting something that looks like the letter in the email to make it seem legit. Really comb over those emails if it's someone reaching out to you out of the blue. You probably don't have to be as diligent if it's a company you applied to, right? But even in those instances, I think diligence is best. So just be careful out there, guys.
And Brian just mentioned something. I wanted to do this in the beginning and I forgot. So Recruiting Network Group, Dan mentioned in the beginning, RNG. It is I will say it really to make it clear, it's an underground corporate recruiting network group that started. I was one of the early birds back in the early 2000s that was one of the founding members. And so it was just a little bit of a networking group that we had maybe 10 people join, and now it's 400 members. So we're talking, this recruiting network group has 400 corporate recruiters or HR people associated with it. It's not publicly knowledge, it's not public knowledge yet. We do have a website that we're putting together to help people in our community. So posting resumes, all of those things. But it is something that is actually just in the talent acquisition realm right now. And if anyone's actually in talent acquisition or recruiting HR and you want to join the group too, please let me know. I'm actually the vice chair on the board right now. Want to mention that.
Awesome. That's great. So Andy says there are a couple of sites that enable you to find your market worth. Can you iterate those for the audience? So my favorite is Career Builder. They have a very good analytics page. I do have the one that my company pays for, but in my understanding, and I've used it before in my personal computer, that you can find some pretty good analytics on that site just on the free option. I also have used Glassdoor in the past, and that one, when I've used it, I've had to make a account. I connected to my Facebook or Google or something like that. It was very easy. It didn't require me to pay for it up to a certain point, but I was able to get all the information I needed before that, what the company paid. Now, you do want to make sure, so Glassdoor specifically is off of information that people give. They're not doing any research to verify that information. So take it with a grain of salt, but it usually gives you a starting point. Hillary, do you have any ones that you use?
Just those that you just mentioned, but also salary.com. I know still has some good information on that. I think actually you mentioned yeah, I think those are good tools to use. Also think about too with doing research on the internet, on Google. You're going to get a wide range, right? So try to understand too that if you have any questions with that, even just asking the recruiter directly, and saying, this is what my thought is with my range. Does this sound like it's, that it's fair, for the position too?
Absolutely. And this might be a little bit reiterating what Hillary just said, but something that I always suggest people do, and it may even be easier in this time because people are home and available at some points, right? Are informational interviews. So if it's a new industry, you should feel comfortable reaching out to folks who've been in that industry longer and are maybe at a place that you would like to be 5 or 10 years down the line. I've been worked in a few different industries. I've never not been able to find at least one person who was willing to give 10 to 15 minutes at the minimum, right? And I was actually very surprised when I started reaching out to people. And in a pre-COVID world, I was reaching out asking to buy them a cup of coffee. They ended up buying me a dinner and also explaining to me, right? So that kind of stuff happens. People are very kind. But even in this situation, just ask if you could have a brief call, a Zoom if they're comfortable with it. Otherwise, over the phone. You can even give the option, if you don't have that flexibility, can I send you a few questions about the industry and about the positions that I'm looking at? And you can give me your thoughts just at your earliest convenience over email. And that might be ways for you to gauge more about the qualifications you're bringing versus what they're paying. If you are able to create relationships like that, you can then loop back around and say, I'm looking to make this much. Do you think that that's accurate or in line with what it's paying? I wouldn't suggest making the first question you ask about salary, but these informational interviews that, they show you're proactive, they give you contacts in the industry. A lot of times they can lead to job offers. I've gotten job offers through this before. They also will give you people to ask questions like this that are maybe a little bit more touchy, right? Salary is something that not everyone's comfortable talking about.
Yeah, use your network too, like LinkedIn. Also use meetup.com. Those are great tools. So if you have someone that is in a more senior position than you, and you're trying to get into that type of field, meetup.com, LinkedIn. Use your network. That's the biggest thing that we're also trying to tell people is you have a network out there. You might just have a connection just because you did connect with someone in the past. If you're doing, if you want more information, just send them a quick message. I mean, that's what LinkedIn's for. It's not Facebook. It's not, it's not like the social game. It's more used for professional resources.
Absolutely. And
All
Dan,
right. Thank you both for this excellent webinar. I did want to say to all our participants, you can check out careersourcetampabay.com. We have a hot jobs page right on our homepage. We have hundreds of jobs from Hillsborough County employers that we post on a daily basis. So please check that out. Most of them are in Employ Florida. You can see the job order and you can be, looking directly right from us and really kind of screen things very easily for you to see if there's anything out there that appeals to you or you're qualified for and get right back in to the job market. Also want to let you all know that we're going to do 2 more of these wonderful webinars next week on June 2nd. Creating a resume and cover letter, and on June 4th, coordinating an effective online job search and networking. So those both start at 10 o'clock. You can register for them the same way you registered for this meeting. So let's virtually recognize our 2 great presenters, Brian and Hillary. Thank you so much for this all these awesome tips on virtual interviewing, and thanks for participating, and hopefully we'll see you all next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good one. Stay healthy.